Hey everyone, me Kevin here. So we are waiting for Joe Biden to come out and speak on the economy and stimulus, but in the meantime, Pelosi and Democrats just spoke outside the White House. Last time we live streamed this, it was Republicans coming out to speak after their meeting with Biden. They didn't have too much to say, but now we've got Pelosi and Democrats. Let's listen to what they said. Let's go ahead and play this.
Looked at my watch to see if it was still morning or afternoon. Good day to all of you. I'm so delighted to be at the White House, and I know I can speak for all of our colleagues when I say that, to visit with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm here with our chairs of committee who have a direct input onto the Biden, the rescue plan that will be on the floor today. As we leave here, we'll go back to the Capitol. Mr. Hoyer, our distinguished leader, will take us to the floor with the package. Our distinguished chair of the Budget Committee, Mr. Yarmouth, will lead us in the debate this afternoon, early this afternoon, so that we will have established the budget plan. On Monday, we will begin working on the specifics of the bills. Hopefully, in a 2-week period of time, we'll send something over to the Senate, and this will be done long before the due date of the expiration of so many initiatives. In terms of this meeting, the president was his usual values-based, knowledge-informed, and strategic thinking in his presentation. It was a joy to hear his commitment to meeting the needs of the American people, open as we all are to bipartisanship, but nonetheless interested in getting results as soon as we can in the best possible way. We passed a reconciliation bill, and we will later today, to have as an option. We would hope we can proceed in a bipartisan way, and that was part of the thrust of our meeting with the president. Most of the time, the president heard from the leadership of our committees in the House, which are our leadership is so beautifully diverse, representative of our country in every way. And I couldn't be prouder than to hear their values-based, knowledge-informed presentations to the president. So as we leave here, we do so happy that he's there and the vice president, and that the Senate, well into the early hours of the morning, passed the bill that we will be able to finish off today. So again, we thank the president for his leadership, for the opportunity to share some thoughts with him, but more importantly, to hear from him about his vision for America. This is the American Rescue Plan to save jobs, as Mr. DeFazio tells me, to save jobs. Next, we'll prepare for the Recovery Act to create many more jobs. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Madam Speaker, is it your understanding that the bill as it is now would be able to pass the House with reconciliation as is? And do you anticipate that it will go through reconciliation and not have Republican support?
Well, as I said, our hope would be that we would have bipartisanship. I think that having reconciliation bill is...
We're going to switch really quick because Biden's live right now. We'll come back to this.
We added just 6,000 private sector jobs in the country last month. Overall, we added 49,000 jobs. And this at a time when we have more than 10 million people out of work. 4 million people have been out of work for 6 months or longer. And 2.5 million women have been driven from the workforce. 15 million Americans are behind in the rental payments. 24 million adults and 12 million children literally don't have enough food to eat. These aren't Democrats or Republicans, they're Americans, and they're suffering. They're suffering not because of anything they did. Through no fault of their own, they're suffering. Once-in-a-century virus has decimated our economy, and it's still wreaking havoc on our economy today. And so much of it is still about the virus. We're still in the teeth of this pandemic. In fact, January was the single deadliest month of the whole pandemic. we lost nearly 100,000 lives. I know some in Congress think we've already done enough to deal with the crisis in the country. Others think that things are getting better and we can afford to sit back and either do little or do nothing at all. That's not what I see. I see enormous pain in this country. A lot of folks out of work, a lot of folks going hungry, staring at the ceiling tonight wondering, what am I going to do tomorrow? A lot of folks trying to figure out how to keep their jobs today and take care of their children.
So much of it is still about
a lot of folks reaching the breaking point. Suicides are up. Mental health needs are increasing. Violence against women and children is increasing. A lot of folks are losing hope. And I believe the American people are looking right now to their government for help, to do our job, to not let them down. So I'm going to act, and I'm going to act fast. I'd like to be doing it with the support of Republicans. I've met with Republicans. There's some really fine people who want to get something done, but they're just not willing to go as far as I think we have to go. I've told both Republicans and Democrats that's my preference to work together. But if I have to choose between getting help right now to Americans who are hurting so badly and getting bogged down in a lengthy negotiation, or compromising on a bill that's up to the crisis, that's an easy choice. I'm going to help the American people who are hurting now. That's why I'm so grateful to the House and the Senate for moving so fast on the American Rescue Plan. Here's what's in that plan. First, it puts $160 billion into our national COVID-19 strategy, which includes more money for manufacturing, distribution, and setting up of vaccine sites, everything that's needed to get the vaccines into people's arms. There's simply nothing more important than us getting the resources we need to vaccinate the people in this country as soon, as quickly as possible. So job number one of the American Rescue Plan is vaccines. Vaccines. The second, the American Rescue Plan is going to keep the commitment of $2,000, $600 has already gone out, $1,400 checks to people who need it. This is money directly in people's pockets. They need it. We need to target that money. So folks making $300,000 don't get any windfall. But if you're a family that's a wage earner, each of the parents, one making 30 grand, one making 40 or 50, maybe that's a little more than, well, yeah, they need the money and they're going to get it. And here's what I won't do. I'm not cutting the size of the checks. They're going to be $1,400, period. That's what the American people were promised. Very quickly, here's the rest of my plan. It has money for food and nutrition so that folks don't go hungry. I think our Republican friends are going to support that. It extends unemployment insurance, which is going to run out on March 13th of this year to the end of September of this year, because we're still going to have high unemployment. It helps small businesses, thousands of whom have had to go out of business. It has money to help folks pay their health insurance. It has rental assistance to keep people in their homes rather than being thrown out in the street. It's got money to help us open our schools safely. It has money for childcare, for paid leave. It gets needed resources of state and local governments to prevent layoffs of essential personnel, firefighters, nurses, folks who are school teachers, sanitation workers. It raises the minimum wage. It's big and it's bold, and it's a real answer to the crisis we're in. That's one more thing, and I want to say it very clearly on this, be very clear on this point. It's better economics. It not only addresses the immediate crisis we're in, it's better for the long-term economic health of our nation and our competitiveness. My plan creates more jobs, creates more economic growth, and does more to make us competitive with the rest of the world than any other plan. Don't take my word for it. Just look at what leading economists across the nation have said, and in the world and across the ocean have said. Wall Street investment firm Moody says If we pass the American Rescue Plan, it will lead to 4 million more jobs than otherwise would be created. The nonpartisan Brookings Institution has looked at the American Rescue Plan and said the GDP will reach pre-pandemic projections by 2021, meaning we'll have recovered by end of 2021. Much sooner, by the way, than if we do nothing. Look, just this week, the Congressional Budget Office projected that if we don't take action, it would take until the year 2025 to return to full employment. There's also a growing chorus of top economists, right, center, left, that say we should be less focused on the deficit and more focused on the investments we make and can make now in jobs, keeping families out of poverty, and preventing long-term economic damage to our nation. The simple truth is, if we make these investments now, with interest rates at historic lows, we'll generate more growth, higher incomes, a stronger economy, and our nation's finances will be in a stronger position as well. And the payoff won't just be in jobs, but in our global competitiveness as well, because we'll be regaining our economic strength faster. So, the way I see it, the biggest risk is not going too big. If we go too small. We've been here before. When this nation hit the Great Recession that Barack and I inherited in 2009, I was asked to lead the effort on the Economic Recovery Act to get it passed. It was a big recovery package, roughly $800 billion. I did everything I could to get it passed, including getting 3 Republicans to change their votes and vote for it. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't quite big enough. It stemmed the crisis, but the recovery could have been faster and even bigger. Today, we need an answer that meets the challenge of this crisis, not one that falls short. And that's the issue facing the country right now. What Republicans have proposed is either to do nothing or not enough. All of a sudden, many of them have rediscovered fiscal restraint and the concern for the deficits. But don't kid yourself. This approach will come with a cost. More pain for more people for longer than it has to be. Secretary Yellen talks about the scarring effect that comes with prolonged economic pain. We see that scarring effect in economic data, but more important, we can see it in the lives of people living with long-term unemployment, living in hunger, at wit's end over how to keep their jobs, take care of their kids. And then she talks about the need to alleviate long-term suffering in the economy. We can do that. We don't have to wait until 2025 to get back to full employment, which will be the case if we don't do this. Again, independent analysis from places like Moody's on Wall Street, Brookings Institution, the American Rescue Plan could achieve that by the beginning, full employment by the beginning of next year. So to me, this is what this moment comes down to. Are we going to pass a big enough package to vaccinate people, to get people back to work, to alleviate the suffering in this country this year? That's what I want to do. Or are we going to say to millions of Americans who are out of work, many of whom have been out of work for 6 months or longer, who've been scarred by this economic and public health crisis, don't worry, hang on, things are going to get better. We're going to go smaller, so it's just going to take us a lot longer, like until 2025. That's the Republican answer right now. I can't in good conscience do that. Too many people in the nation have already suffered for too long through this pandemic and economic crisis. And telling them we don't have the money to alleviate their suffering, to get to full employment sooner, to vaccinate America after $8 trillion in deficit spending over the past 4 years, much of it having gone to the wealthiest people in the country, is neither true nor necessary. We do have the resources to get to full employment sooner. We do have the tools to reduce a lot of suffering in this country. We just have to choose to use them. So it's time to act. We can reduce suffering in this country. We can put people back to work. we can gain control of this virus. That's what the American Rescue Plan does. And that's what I'm determined to do. And that's what I hope we're going to be able to do in the near term. So may God bless you all. May God protect our troops. And I truly believe real help is on the way. Thank you all so very much. Thank you.
Questions?
Mr. President, how could you better target who gets the $1,400 check?
I don't know why they do that. Jen Psaki is going to be having a press conference shortly. And we can also finish listening to what we just heard from Nancy Pelosi. So let me just quickly see. We can tune into this for just a moment here.
Get to full employment. That's not hyperbole. That's a fact. We're going to be in a situation where it take a long, long time. And I appreciate you all coming over and the urgency with which you're moving. This is about people's lives. This is not just about numbers. This is about people's lives. People are really, I don't tell any of you, they're really hurting. People are being evicted. Just look at all the number of people who are needing and seeking mental health services now. Suicides up. People are really drug abuse, violence against women. People are really feeling in a hole. They don't know how to get out. You've given them a lot of hope. And with as they say in Southern Delaware, the grace of God, the goodwill of neighbors, and the creek not rising, we can really begin to do something consequential here. So I want to thank you all. And the president.
So let's go ahead and jump on over to finishing the meeting here with Nancy Pelosi. Yeah, I believe this is roughly where we finished off, so hopefully it's not too redundant. Just kind of a quick recap here. Joe Biden basically just doubled down on his argument that the economy is still in trouble. We had our single deadliest a month in January, 100,000 lives lost, nearly 100,000 lives. The economy's still in trouble. Got to act now. Republicans aren't willing to go as far as we need to go. And Biden says, if I have to choose either being, joining the Republicans or helping the Americans, I'm going to help Americans. He kind of then reiterated his outline for his stimulus plan, $160 billion for vaccines, manufacturing, distribution, the $1,400 checks, though he's open to targeting those a little bit more. He kind of echoed the $40,000 to $50,000 cutoff, so we might see that, extending the unemployment benefits, food benefits, rental assistance, state and local, and so on. Then he talks about how important it is that this happens. But let's go ahead and jump on over and finish listening to Nancy Pelosi. So we're going to jump on over here. I believe this is roughly where we left off, so we'll keep going here.
We'll prepare for the Recovery Act to create many more jobs. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Madam Speaker, is it your understanding that the bill as it is now would be able to pass the House with reconciliation as is? And do you anticipate that it won't go through reconciliation and not have Republican support?
Well, as I said, our hope would be that we would have bipartisanship. I think that having reconciliation bill is necessary so that we know that we will guarantee that we'll have results and hopefully give us some leverage with the Republicans. I hope that we can work together because we are going to work it through. Mr. Hoyer, would you like
Well,
to
I just
speak
want to
that?
say, first of all, you ought to remember, we passed 4 COVID-19 bills with economic recovery and health with overwhelming bipartisan support. And then for whatever reasons, the Republicans decided, let's wait. And we waited a long time, and a lot of people got hurt. And then we passed a $900 billion plus bill in December 16th. That was an overwhelming bipartisan vote as well.
My understanding is
Can I just, let me finish. We call it reconciliation. There's nothing in reconciliation that precludes Republicans voting for it. Now, I want to say this was a unique meeting that I had in the White House just now, all of us had over the last 4 years. This is a unique meeting. We're going to have a lot more because it was not focused on the president. It was focused on the people that we needed to help.
My understanding is that there are some Democrats, though, that are even pushing back on the bill, saying that it should be smaller. Is your understanding, though, that
Mr.
House
Carver?
Democrats?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Distinguished witness, Mr.
I'm
Carver helped vote.
My understanding is that there are Democrats that are pushing back on the bill because of its size. Is your understanding that it would have enough support to pass as is without any changes?
Okay.
Absolutely. And the only size that I've heard anything about before I got here this morning, and I mentioned it to the president this morning, is making sure that we don't dial back on 1,400, that 1,400 is on top of the 600. And therefore, this is the 2,000 that we promised. We said 2,000. They only agreed to 600. Now we're putting the 1,400 to bring it to 2,000. So that's the pushback that I'm getting. And I'm also getting a little bit of pushback on people to make sure that we target what we're doing. And we're all for that. We believe that it should go to the people who need it most. It's just that we are there. We just can't get it reported that we are there.
If I just may say on that score, we have passed 17 reconciliation bills in recent time in a bipartisan way. And so I want to yield to the distinguished chair because the bill that the Senate passed is identical to our instructions to the budget as we sent them. Mr. Yarmouth, get behind the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
And then we'll go.
Right, the speaker's right. We got the same amount in instructions back from the Senate that we passed, so we can pass it with a simple vote today and intend to, and then the committees will draft the legislation that actually creates the assignment of those dollars, and we'll bring that back to the floor in just a couple of weeks. And we only lost 2 Democrats in the vote they just voted for 1.9 trillion, so we don't anticipate a problem with.
Madam Speaker, do you have any concerns that a package this large, approaching $2 trillion, might sacrifice progressive policies going forward?
Absolutely not. One of the things that we always discuss is as we try to address the emergency that we have now, to crush the virus, to save the lives and livelihood of the American people, we're not going to perpetuate any injustices. We spent a good deal of time in the meeting, early part of the meeting, talking about the disparity in access in many ways, but including access to the health provisions that are necessary to fight the virus, now including the distribution of vaccine. Absolutely, positively not.
Madam Speaker, there's been a lot of discussion about the $1,400 direct payments.
Yeah.
You raised the issue that they should be targeted. To whom will they be targeted? Where's the cutoff point? It seems like
Well, let me just say this, because I think that there isn't a clear understanding. This is the overarching budget bill. Next week, the committees of jurisdiction will take those targeted amounts and make the established priorities there. So we're not going to have a negotiation right here. Mr. Neal, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, that falls into his jurisdiction. Did you want to say something about that?
Thanks, Speaker. So in the CARES Act, if you recall, we used a ceiling for joint filers of $150,000 for single filers under $75,000. We had a great deal of difficulty, believe it or not, because there are, in America, joint filers under $24,000 a year, single filers under $12,000 a year who don't have tax ID numbers. We attempt in this package to address many of those issues. But the president mentioned in there discussion with the speaker of a ceiling that we would construct as we go to negotiations, as Speaker Pelosi has noted.
Beyond this issue, was there any discussion of a potential infrastructure bill or renewing the voting rights?
But actually, this was a jobs meeting. Mr. DeFazio, the chair of Transportation Infrastructure.
Actually, when the president acknowledged me, he said, "You're next." And he's committed to doing a infrastructure package. It'll draw on the elements of my Invest Act and the Moving Forward package we passed in the House. We're going to deal with climate change and create a hell of a lot of jobs in this country. And we're going to do it through Bobby Scott's committee, massive job retraining, reaching out to communities that have been left behind and bring them in. And they're going to get good jobs.
I want to make a comment on your question.
Yes.
We had, and I've mentioned this to the president, a very, very successful 116th Congress in the House of Representatives. We passed very meaningful legislation. We passed 5 major bills to help people who are suffering from COVID-19 in our economy. And we passed voting rights. We passed equal rights. We passed H.R. 1. We passed so many very big bills that the American people overwhelmingly supported, and McConnell would not put them on the floor. We're going to move that agenda.
Hold on a second. Just hold on a second. As I said originally, this is the American Rescue Plan, the Biden American Rescue Plan. The next bill will be the Recovery Plan. And again, even before any of us spoke, and even the president addressed us, when we sat down, he said to Peter, "You're next," before anything else.
So walk us through, if you don't mind, if infrastructure is next, and Democrats also want to raise the minimum wage, and there's also talk about canceling student loans up until a certain level.
But you know what? We're not going to go into that level of specificity right here and now. That is a discussion for next week when the members and the committees. Now, because the Senate finished this morning, welcome to our world, more than you want to know on the subject. Because the Senate finished this morning, today, we can notice for markup starting Monday, the beginning of next week, as the committees are prepared to go forward, and some of their preparation depends from one committee to the next. We're talking about this subject. That's it. Yeah. We're talking about this subject. Why don't you have on a jacket?
It feels pretty good. I also ran up because
oh, that's the reason.
Because of the minimum wage, obviously that's not going to be included right now. I'm just curious.
Well, that's not obvious.
That's not obvious. Can you talk for those folks that maybe thought, based on the Senate's vote last night, that the minimum wage increase would not?
Well, we just don't know. We just don't know. We just don't know.
Speaker, can you guarantee that this
Wait a second. You had a question. I'm so sorry. Yes, sir.
Madam Speaker, and maybe for Chairman Beal as well, is there anything that was not in President Biden's proposal that any of your chairmen or chairwomen intend to include in their reconciliation bills? I know there was a question yesterday asked here about aid to airlines to help make sure people stay on the payroll, flight attendants and pilots. Is there anything that's not in the president's blueprint that we should expect to see in one of the bills in markup next week?
Well, the blueprint is what the Senate passed and what we passed yesterday, Mr.
So that's what a markup is for. So the Ways and Means Committee will begin on Wednesday morning and finish by Friday afternoon. That's our plan. We, as the president said and the speaker has repeatedly said, if they can offer suggestions that improve the bill, that's the system I came through.
Can we talk about the
Wait a second. No,
just
to
to your question. Yeah, I was in a long hearing yesterday on COVID impacts on transportation workers, but I saw a Reuters story that said I had been silent on PSP, and I have not been silent. And there is a large transportation component to this bill, saving well over 1 million jobs. We're dealing with transit, we're dealing with rail, we're dealing with contractors, we're dealing with concessionaires, we're dealing with airports, and we're dealing with aviation.
Anybody who hasn't had a question yet?
Madam Speaker, can you guarantee that this will be done by March 15th when those?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Without any question. Before then.
No,
Before then. Before then. Yeah.
Let the 14th.
What's the timeline, please?
The timeline is as follows. Again, more on the subject than you ever want to know. We finished by today. We will pass our bill. When our bill is passed, we can notice for markup. The committees of jurisdiction that have impact on this bill, and it's not every committee of Congress, but it's most, will then do their markups. They'll coordinate among each other so there's no contradiction or whatever. And then by the end of the week, no later, by the end of the week, it will go to the Budget Committee. There are all kinds of things, a couple of days for dissenting views, a couple of days for notice of meetings, that kind of stuff that takes a little time. That goes to Mr. Yarmouth's committee, the Budget Committee. Do you want to go from there, Mr. Yarmouth?
Well, then what we do is we take all of the bills, we package them together, and then we essentially scrub the bill to make sure that there are no fatal errors in it regarding the Byrd rule or any procedural steps that might kill it in the Senate. on technicalities. So we do that. That'll take a few days, and then we bring it back to the floor.
We go to the Rules Committee.
Go to the Rules Committee, and then back to the floor.
What about airlines? Because the White House said yes.
Did President Biden comment at all on this criticism from Larry Summers that there is a risk of going too big here?
No, we didn't talk about Larry Summers.
What about airlines? What about airlines?
Excuse me. We aren't doing, will you listen?
Sure.
We're not doing airlines. The payroll pass-through program is airline workers only. We limited no stock backbacks, no dividends, no executive bonuses. We're using them as a very efficient unemployment division to pass the payroll through to their workers, which is hundreds of thousands of jobs. That's what we're doing. It's not for the airlines. It's not like 9/11. We didn't let that happen.
What about
That's it. Thank you all very much. Going to be continued. Well, so you didn't have a question there.
On rescue, but when can Americans expect the second piece of this bill?
Well, let us get through the fast one first, okay? Right now, we have been focused like a laser on getting this done. This is about crushing the virus. It's about honoring our heroes, our people who work to get this done. It's about putting money in the pockets of the American people. In a matter of less than 2 weeks, I hope, but around that time, we hope to be able to put vaccines in people's arms, money in people's pockets, children safely in schools, and workers in their jobs. And that's what we are doing now. At the same time, the committees of jurisdiction and the Transportation Committee, they have, we started last year with Moving America Forward. The president has put forth Build Back Better. We have the ingredients for what will come next. But we first have to get this done. At the same time, the groundwork is being done for the recovery package. That's it. Thank you all very much.
It's your first trip here in a while. How is it different today than those ones before?
Oh my God. Do you really have to ask? I mean, it was, as I said to the president at the beginning, as a figure of speech, people will say, I'm delighted to be here. But I know I speak for all of my colleagues when I say we are really delighted to be here for what it means to the American people. Thank you.
All right. Now we are going to jump on over to the press conference, which just began.
29,000 jobs per month. Downward revisions to the data in November and December totaled 160,000. So those are negative revisions to those months, earlier reports. And the economy, as I mentioned, has averaged 29,000 jobs over the past 3 months. Now, if you compare that to the trend over the prior 3 months, that trend was closer to 1 million. So you see a really very significant downshift in the pace of job creation. This pace is far below the rate necessary to pull us out of the pandemic jobs deficit. There are about 10 million fewer jobs now relative to February. The unemployment rate fell to 6.3%, which still remains almost 3 points above the rate in February 2020 of 3.5% before the pandemic. Over the same period, more than 4 million workers have dropped out of the labor force. If you drop out of the labor force, you're not counted in the unemployment rate. And those dropouts have been disproportionately women. It's clear that there's a need for urgent and sustained action for the duration of this crisis. In January, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics today, just under 15 million people reported they were, quote, unable to work because their employer closed or lost business due to the pandemic. This number has been about the same since October, after falling in the wake of the implementation of the CARES Act from May to September. Long-term unemployment has risen. This is a great concern of the administration. Reflecting the duration of the economic crisis and the fact that the virus was unconstrained during most of last year. Almost 40% of the unemployed in January had been so for half a year, 27 weeks or more. This 40%, that's an elevated rate, and it represents a shift from temporary layoffs to permanent unemployment. Workers of color have been more likely to lose their jobs than white workers. In January, the unemployment rate for Black workers was 9.2% and was 8.6% for Hispanic workers compared to 5.7% for whites and 6.6% for Asian workers. While the unemployment rate for men and women is relatively similar, women have left the labor force in numbers that are of great concern to us. The employment rate among what we call prime age workers, women 25 to 54, is down 4 percentage points, 2.6 million women since February. This larger decrease for women is unusual in recessions and likely reflects both the industries that this pandemic has hit, tourism, services, face-to-face industries, leisure and hospitality, restaurants, and increased care responsibilities that have been pulling women out of the labor force. Certain industries have been especially hard hit. As I mentioned, the unemployment rate for leisure and hospitality workers is around 16%. The elevation in long-term unemployment is especially salient since benefits for these workers will expire soon without further congressional action. Today's report is yet another reminder that our economy is still climbing out of a hole deeper than that of the Great Recession and needs additional relief to ensure that the pandemic can be brought under control, the families and businesses can stay solvent and make it to the other side of this crisis, and that workers can feed their families and keep a roof over their head. With that.
All right. I'm going to be the moderator. Trevor.
Thanks for that summary. So a couple of questions related to this. First, as far as the $1,400 checks, Jared, do you think that, is there any economic argument for why those shouldn't go to a broader group of people? Is there any argument for raising the threshold that you would need to qualify for that? And then I have a follow-up as well.
I think the key argument there is that there are families throughout not just the lower part of the income scale, but in the middle part of the income scale that have been suffering and trying, doing everything they can to get through this crisis. The president has been very clear on an important point here, which is that if you look at teachers, if you look at folks who are in blue-collar professions, if you look at retail workers, healthcare workers, if those folks are unemployed, they can get unemployment coverage and that helps them. But many of those folks have kept their jobs. Many of them are essential workers, yet they've lost hours, they've lost wages, they're struggling to make ends meet. They face nutritional constraints. Often they face foreclosure or eviction moratoria, which, by the way, forbearance when it comes to mortgage does not mean forgiveness. So many of these families are accumulating significant debt that will come due. Now, in terms of the parameters, you asked about this. Let's do just a little bit of wonky policy analysis, if that's okay. There are three parameters in play here when we're talking about the checks. There's the thresholds where they come in. There's the level. The president has been firm on 1,400 as a level, which, plus the 600 gets you to 2,000. And then there's the phase out. And it's the phase out range that is that I would say is a variable under discussion in negotiations that are ongoing. There hasn't been a conclusion, but as the president has said, he is open to that discussion.
But just as far as what is the economic argument for changing those phase out numbers? Why shouldn't you just go with what you originally proposed?
I think the argument is one that we've heard consistently from some critics, which say that those at the very top of the scale, when you get into the realm of, $300,000, I think have been mentioned. I think it's arguable that those folks don't need the checks. I think what's important to the president is that we don't lose sight of people in the middle of the income scale who continue to struggle with both the health and economic fallout from this crisis. And these checks target them effectively and efficiently. By the way, this is an important thing that comes from some work by the group ITEP, Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy. If you look at the distribution, who gets the checks, it actually, virtually none of it goes to the very top of the scale, and the vast majority goes to the middle and the bottom. Their percentage gains in income from the checks are, double digits compared to those at the top of the scale. So I think that we have to understand that targeting in this case means reaching families at the low end, at the middle end, families who have been hit and are struggling with this crisis.
Okay, super quick follow-up. Could I just one more? Do you think that just beyond this bill, that there needs to be more reform around automatic stabilizers, unemployment insurance? Like, do you need to do more so that the next time we hit something like this, we have a solution?
The president has on occasion talked about this point and said that if our automatic stabilizers are keyed to economic indicators or health indicators, that is a potentially useful policy advance. I know that Treasury Secretary Yellen has talked about that as well. Right now, we're kind of past the stage of thinking about, right now, we're really at a point where we have a package that is calibrated to meet the urgency of the moment. And that's the American Rescue Plan. So that's what we want to focus on. There are all kinds of interesting policy discussions we could and should have, and I think that's one of them. But for now, what we need to do is get this package out there and meet the urgency of the moment.
Thank you, and thanks for being here. I want to ask you about some of the criticism by one of your former colleagues, Larry Summers, of course, former top economic advisor to former President Barack Obama, former Treasury Secretary. He has acknowledged the bailout in 2009, by his own admission, he says didn't go far enough. But he says that this $1.9 trillion proposal is so big that it risks progressive priorities in the future and could potentially undermine the economy next year. Is the Biden administration going too big?
No, I firmly would disagree with that contention. By the way, I wouldn't call the other thing a bailout. That was the Recovery Act, and I think that also was an effective measure. But I think that the idea now is that we have to hit back hard. We have to hit back strong if we're going to finally put this dual crisis of the pandemic and the economic pain that it has engendered behind us. With respect to Larry's point, I mean, one thing is just wrong, which is that our team is dismissive of inflationary risks. We've constantly argued that the risks of doing too little are far greater than the risk of going big, providing families and businesses with the relief they need to finally put this virus behind us. Second, I want to quote Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who strongly reiterated this view the other day, I think it was just a week or so ago, that inflationary risks are also asymmetric right now. When asked about this precise trade-off that you're asking me about, he said, and I'm quoting, "I'm much more worried about falling short of a complete recovery and losing people's careers and lives that they built because they don't get back to work in time. I'm more concerned about the damage that will do, not just to their lives, but to the United States economy, to the productive capacity of the economy. I'm more concerned about that than about the possibility which exists of higher inflation." So this is risk management. This is balancing risks. And in our view, the risks of doing too little are far greater than the risks of doing too much.
And just one more question. The Senate moved forward with a measure that did not include an increase in the minimum wage. Has President Biden come to a determination that that's not going to be a part of the final package in order to get this passed, in order to get the Democratic support that he needs?
The president has consistently argued that a minimum wage, $15 an hour, is essential to make sure that people, many of whom, millions of whom are essential workers, are not toiling at a minimum wage of $7.25 per hour, which is the federal minimum wage. This idea that somehow, and I've heard this in many questions, this idea that the minimum wage is somehow orthogonal to this package makes no sense to me, because it is an efficient and effective way to raise the pay of people who are in the bottom end of this workforce, essential workers in retail trade, in healthcare, in sanitation, people who are keeping this economy going, but consistently undercompensated for it.
Will it be a part of the final package?
I'm not going to negotiate that from the podium, as they say. Wait,
Very good.
I have one other point I want to make, though, getting back to the argument with Larry. This is key from my perspective as an economist who throughout my career has been motivated and concerned. I think the theme of my work has always been making sure that this economy, that our economy, the American economy, provides ample opportunities for people from all walks of life, from all parts of the income scale, men and women, persons of color, communities of color, have the opportunities they need to realize their potential. And right now, there is deep unused capacity in this economy, which is targeted by the American Rescue Plan. There are 10 million unemployed people. There are 2.5 fewer women in the labor force than last year. As I mentioned, Black and Hispanic unemployment rates are 9%. We've got a job market in stall. The risk is a deflationary risk, which motivates us to go home or to go big or to go home. And the costs of inaction, of not addressing these risks, are too steep and too costly to these vulnerable groups relative to the likelihood of overheating. That's the way I think about it.
Thank you. Just one more follow-up from the other Kristen. Is the White House's economic team, is there anyone on the team that is concerned that the 1.9 trillion is too big, is too much, or is everybody in agreement?
The White House economic team is in complete consensus on the urgency of the need for this American Rescue Plan, and in complete solidarity on the calibration of this plan, that it's of the magnitude to meet the challenges we face. Again, with respect to Larry and his piece, it's just flat out wrong that our team is, quote, dismissive of inflationary risks. Janet Yellen is our Treasury Secretary, okay? She knows a little something about inflationary risks and has tracked that kind of, has tracked that economic issue forever. I just quoted from Jerome Powell, whose job is to manage that risk against the risk of slack in the job market, against the risk of persistent unemployment, against the risk of people getting stuck in joblessness so they can't get back out and get back into the job market, against the risk of scarring in the economy, meaning not doing enough about current damages so that they become permanent damages and people can't get back into the labor market. And businesses that should and would be viable on the other side of this crisis fail because we haven't taken the steps to get them through to the other side of the crisis. So the team has all of our oars in the water, pulling in exactly the same direction on that.
Mary, that be the last question.
One other question on Larry Summers' criticism, not to belabor this point, but he also raises some questions about your future agenda. He notes that you will have committed 15% of GDP with this bill, with basically no increase in public investments. Is this a concern going forward? Where will you find the money to build back better, as the president has promised?
I think the way President Biden talks about this is not just resonant, but is also follows an economic logic that I think is very strong. Rescue, recovery. The rescue plan, the American Rescue Plan, gets this economy and the families and the businesses in it to the other side of this crisis by finally controlling the virus, producing, distributing the vaccine, and giving people the relief they need to get to the other side. But simply getting back to where we were is a bar that's far too low for the Biden-Harris administration. And that's where Building Back Better and the recovery plan comes in. These are structural changes, by the way, many of which, as the president has said, permanent programs should be paid for. So these are structural programs that, not in a cyclical sense, dealing with kind of getting to the other side of the crisis, but deal with the structural challenges we face in climate, in education, in care, in poverty, in racial discrimination. And I am, and infrastructure, I am wholly confident in this president and this administration's ability to go forth and make a strong case for rescue now, get the economy the other side of the crisis, pursue the recovery, the Building Back Better agenda. As I say, I'm confident about that. One point, and then I'll stop. Infrastructure, I get asked about this a lot. And the implication kind of the question is that, well, infrastructure is a Democrat thing and you'll have a hard time with that. Let me tell you a little anecdote. I was testifying sometime a year or two ago in the House. And when I finished my testimony, a couple of Republicans, and I won't name them because this was a private moment, pulled me aside and said, hey, Democrat, come here. And they said, we want to do infrastructure. But we can't do it because our boss, President Trump, doesn't have a plan. The plan was really an asterisk. There are, I guarantee you, there are politicians on both sides of the aisle who are champing at the bit to make investments in public goods in this country, to do an infrastructure bill that repairs not just maintenance, but gets into clean energy, into broadband, into the kinds of investments that you've heard the president talk about. So I am confident that we work on rescue now. We'll get to recovery next.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, people often ask me what my favorite part of this job is. It's I get to call up Jared Bernstein or Jake Sullivan and talk to them about questions and bring them in here as often as we can. And that's how it should work. I have a couple of items at the top just to go over and update you all on. First, sorry, let's see. At 3 p.m. this afternoon, Vice President Harris and Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen will hold a virtual roundtable with participants from local Black chambers of commerce from across the country to discuss the importance of passing the American Rescue Plan. Local chamber representatives will share on-the-ground experiences during this crisis, ask the Vice President and Secretary questions, and discuss how small businesses.
I feel like she's like a cruise ship operator. Like at 3 o'clock, this is what's going to be happening.
Tragic deaths of 2 FBI special agents earlier this week. Acting Attorney General Monty Wilkinson will lead the delegation to both Special Agent Laura Schwarzenberger's memorial service on Saturday and Special Agent Daniel Alphen's memorial service on Sunday. At the request of the President, Homeland Security Advisor Dr. Liz Sherwood-Randall will accompany the Acting Attorney General to Sunrise, Florida this weekend to attend both services. Last item, tomorrow the White House, and I have a week ahead. Tomorrow, the White House will launch a new effort for the president to regularly communicate directly with the American people. This was a question one of your colleagues asked earlier this week. There is a time-honored tradition in the country of hearing from the president in this way, from FDR's fireside chats to Ronald Reagan establishing the weekly presidential radio address. President Biden will continue that tradition, and we expect it to take on a variety of forms. The inaugural edition will be a conversation between the president and Michelle, who lives in Roseville, California, and lost her job at a startup clothing company because of the pandemic. Look for that tomorrow on the White House digital channels. Finally, next week, the president will be focused on engaging with bipartisan groups on the American Rescue Plan and other key priorities, including current vaccine distribution and national security. On Monday, he will virtually tour a vaccination center. On Wednesday, he will visit the Pentagon to meet with the Secretary of Defense. And on Thursday, President Biden will visit the National Institutes of Health. So with that, Zeke.
Thanks, Jen. A couple of quick questions for you. Why is the president going to Delaware this weekend?
He is from Delaware and has a home there and is going to spend the weekend with his wife and family there.
The guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as you know, in the White House briefing just a couple of hours ago, was the big X over airplanes. People should avoid travel. Is there an exception to that policy?
Well, the key, Zeke, is ensuring that people don't take steps to make others vulnerable in our effort to get the pandemic under control. As you know, any president of the United States, Democrat or Republican, obviously takes Air Force One, a private plane, when they travel. Delaware is his home, and so he looks forward to spending the weekend there and some time with his family.
Changing gears a little bit, we know that the president's been vaccinated. Has he been receiving regular tests for the coronavirus while he's been here at the White House? We haven't seen since the transition sort of an update on his testing.
I'm happy to get back to you on that and provide you an update. He has, as you know, received his second vaccination, which was done in public.
Yeah, probably no testing then.
You were asked about the president's policies towards federal executions. Does the president plan to put in place a blanket federal moratorium again?
The president has spoken about his opposition to the death penalty in the past, but I don't have anything to predict for you or preview for you in terms of additional steps.
And finally, just one last one, sorry, on the speech.
It's okay. It's Friday. We've got to get it all out.
There's a very different tone from the president. So when did the president recognize that continuing to negotiate with Republicans wasn't going to lead him anywhere, and they sort of had to embrace his proposal? and get on board the train before it leaves the station. It seems like the time for negotiation is over. It's now the president's trying to get this thing passed.
Well, I wouldn't say that's an accurate characterization of his view or the view of any of us. Just to note, even as the package is moving through a reconciliation process, there is a great deal of time. The process enables for time for negotiations through committee work, which will happen next week. And also the majority of reconciliation bills in the past have been bipartisan. And so we certainly are hopeful that there will be opportunities for amendments from Republicans, amendments from others across the board to be a part of this process moving forward. Go ahead, Kristen.
Thanks, Jen. If I could actually just follow up with you and just read some of what President Biden said today. He said, if I have to choose between getting help right now to Americans who are hurting so badly and getting bogged down in a lengthy negotiation or compromising on a bill that's not up to the crisis, that's an easy choice. I'm going to help the American people who are hurting now. So has he resigned himself to the fact that he's going to have to use reconciliation and move forward without 60 votes from Republicans?
Well, he would use reconciliation, right? Congress would use that process. It's a parliamentary procedure, and just in a bill becomes a law moment here. If there is an opportunity to move forward with a bipartisan package at any moment, that can happen. But again, I believe it's 18 of 24, and I can double check this, of reconciliation bills in the past have been bipartisan. And a bipartisan bill has 52 votes, 54 votes, 56 votes. But his point, on the last point, and then we'll go to your next question, is that we are not going to sit here and wait for an ongoing negotiation where, frankly, we haven't received an offer in return, right? A response offer to what the president has proposed, because the American people need the relief now.
Understood, but it seems as though he has resigned himself to the fact that there will not be 60 votes in the Senate for whatever passes.
Well, I think the president listens to the American people who are, frankly, not too worried about what parliamentary procedure gets them relief, gets shots in people's arms, and reopens schools. And he is certainly hopeful that there is opportunity for this bill, whatever form it takes, to have bipartisan support. And there's an opportunity to do that. History shows that's precedent.
If I could ask you on foreign policy, there's going to be a principals meeting on Iran today. President Biden so far has not accepted or has not moved forward with negotiations over a new Iran nuclear deal. When is the time frame for that to happen? And does he think he'll be able to get Democrats on board with this, Jen? They were quite critical in 2015.
Well, first, and you asked this question first and smartly. So on this meeting today, and I know that the interagency process is a little foreign in this building and in the government because of the last 4 years. So this is a principals committee meeting. We're not going to confirm every one of these, but for the sake of educating everyone, not in this room, but people who are watching, it's the focus is broadly on the Middle East. I'm sure Iran will be a part of the discussion, as it's an important issue, an important priority for the president and for many of our partners and allies around the world. But this is not a decisional meeting. It's not a meeting where policy will be concluded, and it's not a meeting the president of the United States will be attending. So this is a normal part of the interagency policy process, just as there are meetings about immigration, criminal justice, the economy every single day across government.
But on the topic of Iran, understood, given that you say Iran will be raised in this meeting, is there a timeline for when President Biden would like to try to come back to the table and get a deal on the Iran nuclear?
Well, that's really up to Iran. If Iran comes back into full compliance with the obligations under the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, just for people who don't like acronyms, I personally hate them, but the United States would do the same and then use that as a platform to build a longer and stronger agreement that also addresses other areas of concern. But that will be done in partnership with our P5+1 partners and also through consultation with Congress. And I know I keep saying this, but we are still only 2.5 weeks into the administration. So this is part of how the interagency process should work, where senior members of the national security team are meeting and engaging about a range of issues in the Middle East. But otherwise it's in Iran's court to comply. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. One more foreign policy question. During President Biden's big foreign policy address yesterday, he didn't really mention Afghanistan. Why not? And where is he on the full withdrawal of U.S. troops from that country?
appreciate your question because it was not meant to be a comprehensive foreign policy speech, and he will have a lot more to say about foreign policy and his approach to national security in the weeks ahead. But there were a lot of topics that weren't discussed because it wasn't designed to give the overarching Biden doctrine or give his comprehensive view on every issue globally, in part because there are interagency processes that will be ongoing. Consultations with our partners and allies are a key part of our policy development, as is consultations with members of Congress. So there's nothing I have in terms of an update as it relates to Afghanistan at this point in time, but he will have more to say on foreign policy in the weeks ahead.
Okay. What is being done about what is being done, what could be done to provide COVID testing to migrants at the border? Because right now the U.S. Customs and Border Protection is saying that they're having to catch and release some migrants without giving them any kind of COVID test before they're entering the community. So what is being done? What could be done?
Are you suggesting they're letting people in across the border without testing them, or just tell me a little bit more about
They're
what you're
being released. They're having to, because of the executive order that the president signed earlier this week.
Which executive? Which one?
Rescinding President Trump's policy, which stopped catch and release. They're saying that they're having to release some migrants into the community before they know for sure that they do not have COVID, and they're worried that it could spread in the community. Is there anything being done at the federal level to make sure that this is not contributing to the spread of coronavirus in this country?
Well, certainly the reason we've put in a number of protections in terms of travel and otherwise is to keep the American people safe. But I haven't seen that report. I can't validate the accuracy of it, but I'd certainly point you to the Department of Homeland Security for more specifics about what's happening at the border. Go ahead.
Thank you. You continue to say that you're hopeful that Republicans will still get on board, you can achieve bipartisanship. But we haven't seen any movement on the Republican side. The fundamental differences remain the same. What gives you hope and optimism that Republicans are suddenly going to come around here?
Well, I think one, the vast majority of the American people support this package that would bring relief to American families, that would get shots in the arms of the American people and would help reopen schools. Those are not Democratic ideals. They're not Republican ideals. They are American ideals. So we still keep the door open to seek ideas to make the package stronger from any Republican or other Democrats who want to bring them forward.
And given the president's remarks earlier and his change of tone, it does seem that he is now okay if this does happen just with Democratic support, despite those hopes and despite his calls for unity.
Well, first of all, the president ran on unifying the country and putting forward ideas that would help address the crises we're facing. He didn't run on a promise to unite the Democratic and Republican Party into one party in Washington. This package has the vast majority of support from the American public. This is something that people want. They want to see it pass. They want these checks to get into communities. They want this funding to go to schools. They want more money for vaccine distribution. He is certainly not, I wouldn't draw that conclusion. He is somebody who is keeping the door open. He will remain engaged with Republicans in the days ahead. As you know from covering the Hill, there's still several steps in the process here to move it forward. We saw even some actions last night in Vote-A-Rama, which is my favorite term of the week, where there was bipartisan support for ensuring the checks were targeted. There was bipartisan, I know somebody asked a question about minimum wage earlier. There actually was bipartisan support on that, including from Senator Bernie Sanders, for making sure that it wasn't implemented immediately. There is bipartisan support for helping small businesses. There's disagreement, certainly on the size, but there is a shared view that the American people need relief, and it is our responsibility to keep the door open to any good ideas that come forward.
And on the minimum wage, do you feel that this bill is your best shot at getting through a hike? Does it become more difficult going forward if you can't get it done now?
I don't want to get ahead of where we are in the process, but the president believes that increasing the minimum wage is something that would help American families, and it is essential to helping people who are struggling, and something that workers certainly deserve. We will leave it to the Democrats and Republicans in Congress to see if this is possible through the parliamentary process of reconciliation. Go ahead, Karen.
Jen, to follow up on that and the quote that Kristen read, but I also want to come back to a vaccine question.
Sure.
The president said, it's an easy choice between getting help to Americans who are hurting or getting bogged down in negotiations. What's his definition of bogged down? What's a timeline looking like? Like for him, who's been involved in negotiations for many years, what does bogged down mean?
It means bogged down. It means I'm not going to set a timeline. I understand the desire and interest in that, but urgency means he is pleased to see that members of Congress, that Leader Schumer and that Speaker Pelosi are moving this forward rapidly. That there is fire under the bellies in the bellies of people in Congress to get this package through, move it through the process over the coming days and weeks. But that's up to them on the timeline. He just is going to continue to argue for urgency because the American people, until they know when they're going to get checks, until they know when schools are going to get funding, it's hard for them to plan. We know that there are timelines that are coming up. One, we're at the brink of spending out the package from December. $600 billion of that has already been spent out. And a lot of it is going to be spent out in the coming weeks. There is going to be a need for additional relief in all of these categories, so hence the urgency. But I don't have an exact deadline or due date other than let's keep moving.
On vaccines,
sure.
We're hearing so much in our reporting about frustration across the country with people who are trying to navigate the system. They're signing up on multiple websites through multiple means to hope to win a lottery and get a vaccine appointment. What is the federal government doing right now to address this challenge for so many Americans? And why can't there be a better system so it's easier to just sign up and wait for your turn?
We agree with you completely. That it is completely confusing, has been around the country in states and localities. The American people who are just trying to do their job, take care of their kids, homeschool, balance everything everybody's balancing right now, just want to be able to go on a website and sign up for their vaccine. Now, one of the steps we've taken, we announced earlier this week, is of course working with pharmacies to distribute about 1 million doses in order for Americans to be able to do that in certain communities. That's obviously that number is going to be increased over time. That's one way. There are large plans through FEMA to set up large vaccination sites. That is something that is starting to be underway this week. But our focus is very much on increasing communication, ensuring, exactly as you said, that the American people know how, when they can get their vaccine. And we fully agree. There's been a lack of communication, confusion, and we are trying to work out of that hole, but we're only 2.5 weeks in here. So it's in process.
There be healthcare.gov, but for vaccines. Jeffrey Zients obviously has a lot of experience with that. Could you do a federalized system?
As does Andy Slavitt, some people back from the healthcare.gov days. Look, I think there are a range of options under consideration. I have not heard them suggest that, but they are very open and discussing every day ways to make this more accessible, clearer to the American people. And they just want to do it in a way that's effective and efficient and reaches local communities where people are trying to get vaccinated. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know you just said you wanted to refrain from giving a timeline on the COVID relief bill and its passage. But outside an hour ago, Speaker Pelosi said absolutely when asked if the COVID stimulus would pass by March 15th. Is that, do you also share that confidence that it would pass by mid-March when those unemployment benefits run up?
Never doubt Speaker Pelosi and anything she says. That's kind of a lesson I've learned in Washington. She is a powerful and fierce force up there. We're not going to set a timeline from here. It is a bill that would be passed by Congress, of course. Speaker Pelosi is, the Speaker of the House. So certainly we would defer to her, and the president looks forward to signing the bill when it comes to his desk.
You feel an urgency to get it passed by that date, though?
We feel an urgency to move it forward as quickly as possible. And I think what you're referring to is kind of the unemployment cliff that will hit in March. But certainly we would like to see action as quickly as possible, as we've been saying, but I'm not going to set a new deadline from here. Obviously, we're working closely with Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, every day. Go ahead on the way back.
Thank you very much, Jen. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Two Asia questions, if I may.
Sure.
On engaging with China, yesterday President Biden said he will work with allies and partners. However, also on yesterday, French President Macron said, quote, a situation to join all together against China. This is a scenario of the highest possible conflictuality. This one, for me, is counterproductive, end quote. So what exactly does President Biden expect from the U.S. allies?
From our U.S. allies, well, we're going to work in close consultation, of course, in partnership with our U.S. allies on a range of issues. We talked about Iran a little bit earlier in the briefing. Of course, strategic competition with China is part of that. But I can only really speak for what our policy is here from this White House and the United States. This administration sees the United States as engaged in strategic competition with China, and technology is a central domain of that competition. We should have no illusions about China's objectives, which are to undercut America's longstanding technological advantage and to displace America as the global leader in cutting-edge research and development and the technologies and industries of the future. The national security and economic consequences of allowing that to happen are simply unacceptable. That's certainly what the president conveys in his conversations with our partners and allies. But this is a major reason why the president is committed to making major investments in science and technology research and development, as well as supply chain security. And we will leverage the full breadth of authorities available to us to protect U.S. national and economic security interests. That's our position here. And obviously, he will communicate that to allies and partners as he's having engagements with them. Did you have a second question?
Actually, Asian American women actually have the highest jobless rates for the past 6 months. And the report indicates that because of racism during the pandemic against them. So other than sign the memo, what President Biden can do to reduce the racism against Asian Americans and help them to actually find a job or to deal with their current situation?
Well, certainly one of the things that he can do is speak out against racism of any form, but also how it impacts a range of communities, Asian Americans, of course, communities of color. And one of the factors we've seen in data about COVID, of course, is that the pandemic has had an undue impact on many communities, including many communities of color. I don't have the exact data on Asian American communities specifically, though I'm happy to check on that. But his focus is on getting the pandemic under control in order to help provide a bridge to economic relief and recovery. And that's one of the ways he can help address that. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have two rather quick questions, then a little bit more meaty one, if that's okay.
I like the setup so I can know what to prepare for. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first quick one. I'll frame it as a yes, no, or maybe, perhaps.
I never like those questions, but go ahead.
Will President Biden use the power of the bully pulpit to help cajole teachers who are unwilling to go back to schools to go back?
Well, one, I'm just going to reject the premise of the question. I will say I have teachers in my family, as I'm sure many of you do. They are the first people to tell you that teaching in the classroom and being able to engage with kids in the classroom or middle schoolers or high schoolers in the classroom, it makes their job more enjoyable, makes them more effective at what they do. The president is absolutely committed to reopening schools. He wants them not just to reopen, but to stay open. And he wants to do that in a safe way. And we're going to rely on CDC guidance, which again is not officially out yet, to determine the best way to do it. But there are several mitigating factors that we've seen in data to date that will help make it safe. Of course, vaccines are part of that, but so is masking, so is social distancing, so is ensuring that schools have the ventilation and the facilities that they need in order to do it safely. That's our focus. So the president's focus is on, and that's one of the reasons why he's out advocating for the American Rescue Plan. Part of that is funding so that schools can do exactly that.
That sounded like a yes with an asterisk.
If you are the spokesperson for the White House, you could certainly say that, but you are not. But you can ask me another question.
My second quick question is last year, OMB and the Justice Department made it so that 3 cities, New York, Seattle, and Portland, could be disfavored for federal grants. They were deemed, quote, anarchist jurisdictions for allegedly tolerating rising crime or violent protest. Has the Biden White House decided to reverse those policies disfavoring grants to those 3 cities?
This is an OMB action from the Trump administration you're asking about?
Justice Department, yes.
Okay. We're a new administration. We, of course, are reviewing a range of policies and charting our own path. But I don't think I'm going to have any comments on policies from a year ago from the prior administration.
The third more meaty question, if I could just follow up on a quote from the president in December. He said, quote, "My son, my family will not be involved in any business, any enterprise that is in conflict with or appears to be in conflict with where there's appropriate distance from the presidency and government." Just recently, there were reports that the president's son still owns a 10% stake in a Chinese investment firm formed with state-owned entities. Do you have an update on the divestment from that investment?
He has been working to unwind his investment, but I would certainly point you, he's a private citizen. I would point you to him or his lawyers on the outside on any update. Go ahead.
Thanks. I have two questions. Jared Bernstein was talking about the threshold of the stimulus checks and when they should phase out. And he said people who make over $300,000 or families should not get those checks. We've seen Susan Collins and some other Republicans talk about having the checks phase out to $50,000. What is the White House's position today on when those checks should start to phase out and who should not be eligible for them?
There's an ongoing discussion about it, and it is an active discussion. The decision a final conclusion has not been made. As Jared was saying, those conversations are happening with Democrats and Republicans. And as I said kind of the other day, but it still is the status today, the president is firm on the necessity that people receive who are eligible $1,400 checks. He's not movable on that becoming smaller, but there is a discussion, as Jared said, about the phase out and what that looks like. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody making that it's a dead cutoff. It means that it will be phased out to slightly less than that amount at whatever the cutoff is. But those are ongoing discussions, and a final decision hasn't been made.
Secondly, there has been a lot of discussion today. President Biden talked about the 2009 stimulus package and lessons that he and other people learned from it. What are some other points of economic crisis that the Obama administration dealt with that President Biden has drawn lessons from? Is it from the auto bailout? There was so much that people were dealing with at that time. What other economic crises did he draw lessons from, and what are those, and how is he applying those to the situation today?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I have not had this in-depth discussion with him about the impacts of the Obama administration policies on his thinking. I can say broadly speaking, because there are people who, of course, a number of us who had served in the prior administration. Of course, there are lessons about ensuring we act swiftly when the American people need relief, looking for bipartisan support, which is something certainly the former administration also did. There's also lessons we've learned about how we sell the packages that we're putting out there to the public. And that's one of the reasons why we bring in some of our economic officials or policy experts so that they can help lay out for all of you and hopefully for the public the thinking behind how packages are designed. And also that we need to continue to think about how we break down these packages for the public to ensure we're explaining why we're doing what we're doing. It's not just a $1.9 trillion package, right? It is a package that has funding to reopen schools. It is a package that it has funding to help ensure cops and firefighters can stay in their jobs. It's a package that will get vaccines in the arms of Americans, and it's a package that will ensure that the 1 in 7 Americans who don't have enough are concerned about putting food on the table are able to do that. So those are some of the lessons, but I don't have anything more about what he's specifically drawn from it.
It seems like part of that lesson is to not wait for Republicans forever. It seems like you want to move quickly.
The president wants to move quickly, as he talked about back on the campaign trail, too, because the American people need relief now. And then we don't have the luxury of waiting months to deliver that relief to them. So that is about reacting and responding to the needs of the American public at this moment in time and the crises we're facing. Go ahead, Kristen.
Jen, thanks. I'd like to follow up on the issue of school reopenings. Dr. Walensky had said at a previous briefing there is increasing data to suggest that schools can safely reopen and that they can safely reopen without teachers getting vaccinated. You then said the official CDC guidance is not out yet, but there is some urgency to this because schools are making their decisions right now about how and when to reopen. So does the Biden administration have an assessment today about whether schools can reopen with or without teachers getting vaccinated?
Well, first, the guidance will come officially from the CDC, as Dr. Walensky, who leads the CDC, would certainly convey to you. And what we're all conveying, and what I just did a few minutes ago, is convey that there's a lot of data that shows that It is, of course, we're looking at vaccines. That's an important part of keeping teachers and the American public safe. But we also need to look at and other mitigation steps, I should say, including masking, social distancing, proper ventilation in schools, and the urgency should prompt Democrats and Republicans, many Democrats are, to come together to support the American Rescue Plan so we can get schools the funding they need. Schools are planning, but many of them don't have the funding they need to take the steps necessary to reopen.
Do you know when the CDC specifically is going to put out that guidance?
I would certainly point you to the CDC for more specifics on that. Go ahead, Anita.
Thank you. Do you have a sense at this point of when the cabinet nominations will go through? Obviously, we're right up against the impeachment trial. This is what you all didn't want to happen, which is this delay. We don't know how long the trial will last. I'm specifically curious about the Attorney General. I know you're eager to get him in. So any sense of that? And I assume that the President has spoken to Senate leaders about that. Is there anything that can be done?
Well, we are certainly hopeful that more of our cabinet nominees can move forward. We have seen a number of them move forward in the last couple of weeks, many with bipartisan support, with bipartisan votes. But you're right that getting the Attorney General through, Merrick Garland, is vital not only to the president, but should be vital to Democrats and Republicans in Congress in order to have a leader at the head of the department who can oversee an independent Justice Department and ongoing effort and review any ongoing efforts or investigations that are happening there. This is an issue broadly, the confirmations in general, he has raised in the past with members of Congress. And certainly there's an understanding about the importance of having his people in place leading agencies. But I don't have anything specific for you to update on the timeline of an Attorney General being confirmed.
And just generally, there's sort of no specific timeline on when these might be done, just as soon as possible, no timeline.
Certainly, Anita, as soon as possible. We are confident that the Senate can walk and chew gum at the same time. As you will know, there was a delay in part because of the need to agree on a power sharing agreement. Obviously, we're past that. And certainly, given many of the comments, including from many Senate Republicans about the qualifications of our Attorney General, the President's Attorney General nominee, and the value that I think and hope we all share to have an independent Justice Department, we're certainly hopeful they can move forward as quickly as possible.
Really quick housekeeping, excuse me, sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
About next week. You mentioned a couple things that he's doing next week. One, on the Pentagon visit, should we be expecting speeches like we saw yesterday at these? I think Jake mentioned that he'll be doing a round of visits. So should we be expecting a speech at that event next week?
That's a great question. I don't think we're fully cooked yet in the process. Certainly part of his effort is to thank civil servants and members of the military, of course, for the work they do every day protecting the American people. But in terms of what format the event will take, we're not quite there yet in our planning process.
The other thing about next week, you mentioned a couple things, but you didn't mention meeting with members of Congress on the bill. I assume some of those meetings are going to happen next week. Can you tell us about any of those specific things? Will they come over here? Or?
Well, many of them will be on recess. But he will be engaged, of course, continue to be engaged with members of Congress. Often those come together the day before or the night before, and we will, of course, keep you updated as those engagements happen or are planned for next week. Go ahead.
So we know the president's doing an interview before the Super Bowl on Sunday. I mean, I'm guessing that's going to be an opportunity to reach a huge audience with your recovery plan. Is that going to be what he's going to use it for? And I guess also I'd like to know how will the president be watching the game and who he'll be rooting for?
Who he'll be rooting for? Oh, boy. That's my first way to get hate mail from one part of the country. There's a division among our senior staff, I will admit, on this particular question, but I won't name names. The president will be watching the game in Delaware with his family, of course, his wife, Dr. Biden. In terms of the interview, and as you know, CBS is hosting the Super Bowl this year, and there's a long tradition of networks doing an interview with the president. So that will certainly be part of what you will see on Sunday. He, of course, that the anchor who is doing the interview will ask whatever the anchor wants to ask. That's how these things occur. But his objective is certainly to convey to the American people that he knows this time is difficult. He knows it requires a great deal of sacrifice. He's incredibly grateful to the healthcare workers, to the frontline workers, to people who are working every day to keep us safe. And hopefully he will have the opportunity to reiterate the measures that we can take. Masking, social distancing, of course, ensuring that people are getting the vaccine when they're eligible to get the vaccine, and update the public on his efforts to do exactly that.
If I might just ask a second one for a colleague who can't be here because of COVID restrictions, from Brian Karem of Playboy. I mean, we saw a break with Saudi policy yesterday in the Middle East. So will the Biden administration openly condemn or implement sanctions against the Saudi government for the death of Washington Post writer Jamal Khashoggi?
So first, let me say and reiterate that murder of Jamal Khashoggi was a horrific crime. We are prepared to release an unclassified report with full transparency for Congress. This is the law, and we'll follow the law. Of course, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence would have further details, and I would refer you to them for additional specifics. We, of course, expect Saudi Arabia to improve its record on human rights. That includes releasing political prisoners, such as women's rights advocates for Saudi jails. We're encouraged by the release yesterday of 2 dual national American Saudi citizens. We hope to see further progress over the next coming months. And as noted in a couple of areas we've talked about, there's an ongoing review, of course, of our policies. You saw the president make an announcement yesterday about our engagement in Yemen, which of course is directly connected. But again, there'll be ongoing discussions and reviews by our national security team. And I don't have any policy decisions to read out for you or predict for you at this point in time. Go ahead in the back.
Thanks, Jen. And I have 2 questions as well.
Sure.
And keeping with the economic theme of the day, my first question. Given the most recent job numbers and the continued unemployment and what you had to say today about particularly how minority communities have been affected, is this the right time to increase the number of refugees coming into the country and to also ease immigration and border restrictions?
Well, the president fundamentally believes that having a humane and moral immigration system in place strengthens our country, strengthens our economy, and many business leaders across the country have said exactly the same thing. The most powerful step that can be taken now is to pass the American Rescue Plan, because that is a step that economists across the board have said would help expedite economic recovery, help expedite getting people back to work. And without it, we will be years behind according to a lot of economic data, where we need to be.
And now from the public health aspect of it, considering the coronavirus numbers are still where they are, the president has enacted more restrictions on travel restrictions, including South Africa. How does that play into it with immigration and refugee policy?
Sorry, no, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
Well, I mean, considering the coronavirus numbers where they are and that we're doing more restrictions on travel, does that not also then affect refugee policy and immigration, bringing more people into the country, sort of following up on Kristen's?
Well, the refugee policy is increasing the cap. It doesn't change what our travel restrictions or our travel policies are. And of course, those are put in place to keep the American people safe. But those are not meant to do anything other than take necessary steps at this moment in time based on the advice of health and medical experts on where we need to restrict travel from. Obviously, when it's safe to undo those restrictions, our health and medical team will advise us on exactly that.
And then my second question, this is going to the Pentagon. This week, the Secretary of Defense announced a stand down for the military to discuss extremism and extremist ideology. Why would the military need to stand down from enemies foreign and abroad to have these discussions?
Well, my bet is that Secretary Austin and my friend John Kirby would disagree with your assessment there. But the president has tasked an overview and a review of domestic violent extremism in the country. That's coming directly from him, happening in the White House. I know that my friend John Kirby has a briefing later this afternoon, and I'd certainly encourage people to ask them more about those plans.
Just to further on that, Jake Sullivan mentioned the focus on domestic terrorism yesterday from this administration. I think a lot of people want to know, how does this administration define the term domestic terrorist?
In what way?
Well, does that include Antifa specifically?
how do you set those parameters for domestic terrorists, especially as we see, a lot of focus on the January 6th, maybe not as much focus on some of the extremism and violence in the Northwest?
Well, I've answered a version of this question a couple times before, but I know everybody's not in the briefing room every day. The reason we have the review, which is not a political review, but is a review done by our national security team, something tasked again to take a review of domestic violent extremism, will cover incidents across the board. When they have concluded that review, I'm sure they'll have more to say on it.
Okay, go ahead, Trevor.
I think I've been skipping you unintentionally. I'm sorry.
Just one quick foreign policy question. Just talking about Iran and China and the need to have allies that are willing to go into those kind of thorny issues with you. There's been some reporting that the EU commissioner is going to have a phone call with President Biden and propose a 6-month truce on trade tariffs. And I'm just wondering if he's open to that and whether that would give you a united front going into some of these issues.
I know there's a lot of interest in trade tariffs, and that's also under a review now. I don't have anything to preview for you. I can follow up with our team on plans for a call with the EU commissioner, and if that's being planned, we will, of course, provide you with a readout.
Go ahead.
Yeah, following up on the several questions about school reopenings, does the White House believe, schools are contemplating this right now, whether to go back and reopen their schools. Does the White House believe that they should hold off on reopening until the CDC guidelines are out and until the American Rescue Plan is passed?
Well, I think some schools are looking for that guidance and also looking for funding. Obviously, different jurisdictions make decisions, but we are hopeful that when the CDC guidelines are out, that will provide some advice, or from a medical, more than that, specific guidance from our health and medical team, the expertise of Dr. Walensky and her team on exactly what mitigation steps can and should be taken to reopen schools safely.
But for schools in the moment right now, weighing whether they should reopen, you don't have a recommendation one way or the other, just to wait for the guidelines, or just trying to clarify?
We'll have I'm not going to get ahead of what the guidelines are. I think there are different jurisdictions that make different decisions. A lot of school districts are certainly waiting for those guidelines, but also waiting for additional funding so that they can reopen schools safely, make sure teachers are safe, students are safe, and families can feel confident in their kids being at school.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Following up on one of the questions from earlier, and then I have a foreign policy question too, but is there any update on the state of a large-scale public sort of PR media campaign supporting the vaccination effort, or is it difficult to do that without knowing whether or not the inventory is sufficient enough to actually tell people to go to CVS or Walgreens or wherever they may be supposed to go?
Well, certainly part of our commitment is to launch a massive public affairs campaign, which is something we've talked about a little bit in here. It takes a little bit of time to get all your ducks in a row to get that going. But part of what we're also trying to do is utilize our experts to be out there publicly, do these briefings 3 times a week to, as Karen was asking about earlier, provide more accurate and clear information to governors so that they can also communicate with communities, empower local medical experts and doctors so that they can communicate more clearly with their communities, which are some of the most trusted sources. We've had a lot of officials out on local television, doing local television interviews. So even as we're preparing for more of a widespread or broad scale, I should say, public campaign, we've also had a number of members of our team doing everything we can to communicate effectively and efficiently on this particular issue.
And the foreign policy question, sometime overnight during the vote-a-rama in the Senate, there was a...
You just wanted to use that word, I know it.
There was a 97-3 vote in favor of supporting the location of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Is there a position in terms of the Biden administration as to whether or not the Trump administration's actually implementation of the Jerusalem Embassy Act should be maintained, or whether it might move back to Tel Aviv?
It's a great question. I have not talked to our national security team about it. I will venture to do that and circle back with you directly.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Friday.
Holy smokus. That was very, very long. Oh man, hold on. This is the downside of using these things, is if I take them off, it disconnects them, and then I start hearing myself. That's a problem. All right, so I guess I have to leave them on. I'll have to figure that out. I have to like disable the setting. All right, this is annoying. Hold on, I gotta take this off because otherwise I hear myself. Hold on. I'll just mute this really quick, and we'll do a recap. Okay, that's really annoying. So there. Much better. All right. Okay, let's do a recap. Wow. Oh man. All right. Here we go. Hey everyone, me Kevin here. We just sat through about a 1 hour and 34-minute series of a live stream listening to Biden, Jen Psaki, Pelosi, and how about I just give you the highlights, which I think will be a lot shorter than, actually I know it's going to be a lot shorter than an hour and a half. All right, so first, we heard from Pelosi, the latest on stimulus, and the latest is that on Monday, she hopes to start working on the specifics of the stimulus bill, or she says she will begin working on the specifics of the bill on Monday. She hopes that in 2 weeks, we'll be able to send something from the House to the Senate that will be able to begin getting voted on or potentially getting negotiated. Ultimately, she hopes, and lots of hoping, I know, that they will be done long before March 15th. When she said that, one of the reporters who was pretty close to the mic laughed and said, "So March 14th?" And that's also now leading to a lot of jokes that basically we might not see our stimulus checks until April Fool's Day, because if they get this done on the 14th, well, I mean, look at the current $600 tiny checks. It's been like, what? 4 or 5 weeks now, and people are still just now getting their checks. Anyway, Nancy Pelosi was also asked about the $2,000. Like, are we going to get the full $1,400? Is it going to get cut back? She says she's committed to doing the full $1,400. So that way it's $2,000 total if you count the $600 prior. She also says the game plan now is we're going to 100% focus now on the rescue plan. Then we will do the recovery plan. So the rescue plan is the stimulus package. The recovery plan is the infrastructure package. And then somewhere in between, maybe we'll have this immigration bill. Now, Nancy Pelosi was asked, well, what about tax reform? Are we going to see that this year? And she kind of lashed out at this. She's like, we're going to talk on this subject. And she kind of blew that off. So then she was asked again, can we get this done by March 15th? She says, absolutely. We've got the support to do it. Then there was a question about airline bailouts. So there are going to be more airline bailouts. One of the dudes was pretty pissed off when he replied. He basically said, we're not doing airlines, but he clarified that they are doing airlines. He's like, we're not providing money to the airlines. We're providing payroll support. So basically money is going to the employees of the airlines, with the restrictions that airlines do no dividends, no bonuses, and no buybacks for their stocks. Then Jen, and I'll save Biden for the last here. Jen Psaki, she probably took up most of the time. She talked a lot about a lot of different topics. I'll mostly just focus on stimulus here. So she also had Jared Bernstein come up, talk about the economy. One of the big things they brought up here that we haven't heard before, so I really want to hit the new things here, is that forbearance does not mean forgiveness. This is new because, I mean, we know that forbearance for houses doesn't mean forgiveness, but it's interesting that they bring this up because it kind of implies that maybe they're thinking about doing something for homeowners. Who knows? No guarantees. Maybe that's what they mean for the stimulus checks as a reason, like we got to get people money because forbearance doesn't mean forgiveness. I don't know. We also heard something new that there is a deflationary risk. In other words, we got to print money so that we don't have deflation, which makes sense because as you print money, technically you expand the money supply and you increase the chance of us seeing an inflation in consumer prices, which helps prevent prices from falling, which could create a deflationary vortex of people going, oh, well, why would I buy the boob headphones now if I could just wait to buy the boob headphones next year? They'll be cheaper, right? That's the deflationary spiral. People aren't incentivized to spend. So really you had this economic advisor coming up saying, hey, we should just do more stimulus because, hey, we want some inflation. All right, then we're wholly confident on rescue now, pursue a recovery later. There are politicians on both sides who want to do infrastructure, but that will come after. 18 of the last 24 budget recon bills have been bipartisan. Maybe this one will be as well. The Democrats are saying, hey, we actually have not gotten a counteroffer yet from Republicans. So maybe they should counteroffer our proposal. Republicans obviously say, what are you talking about? We have a $605 or $625, whatever, billion plan. And it's our tiny stimulus package. And I think Democrats are really kind of just blowing that off. That package obviously doesn't provide any support for state and local governments. It eliminates the $400 unemployment boost and only provides $300. So a lot of big differences. No boost to rental assistance was in there as well. In fact, here I could pull up quickly on the iPad. We'll just look at this really quick. This just gives you a quick reminder of the differences between the plans. Let's do a quick little, okay. There we go. Gotta get an actual pencil here. I think Jack or Max stole one of my pencils. Okay. Anyway, we won't use the pencil right now. So we know that Biden's plan is $1.9 trillion. We've got direct payments. We've got unemployment, right? It's a big plan. This is $1.9 trillion. And the Republicans, $618 billion. I've seen so many different estimates for it. It's much tinier. We can actually also look at here. This gives us an idea. There we go. So no money for state and local governments in the Republicans' plan. Much less money for the child tax credit. Small businesses get less money. No rental assistance. Actually, no child tax credits, right? So we get a little bit of a comparison there. All right, let's continue on and jump back to just really the new information that we heard from the press conference. A lot of it was repeated information, which is not so exciting. So we're going to cut out a lot of that. So one of the other things that Jen Psaki said was the vast majority of Americans support this plan. We're going to get this plan done. We have no expectations of not getting this $1.9 trillion plan done. I think Wall Street is still thinking this plan is going to get watered down to maybe a $1 trillion plan. I don't think people actually believe that Democrats are going to be able to push this through. We'll see. Jen Psaki even said, never doubt Pelosi, which I think many of us potentially will roll our eyes at that, because I think there's been plenty of reason to doubt Pelosi over the last year. And this isn't to be partisan, but I mean, how many times have we heard there's going to be heroes pay? How many times have we heard there's going to be retroactive unemployment pay, and it hasn't come through? Those are Pelosi's words, okay? It's not trying to bag on Dems. It's just a fact. All right. Then Joe Biden came out. Joe Biden said the virus is still wreaking havoc on the economy and us. January was the single deadliest month. We lost nearly 100,000 lives. The economy is still in trouble. Some want to do little or nothing at all. But if I'm going to act, it's going to be act fast and do big. So he wants to do a big plan fast. He says if he has to choose between helping Americans versus compromising, the answer will always be helping Americans. There's certainly a political spin on this, but I mean, Biden's being pretty blunt. He's saying, hey, look, we're going to do my $1.9 billion plan. We're not cutting the size of the check to $1,000 like Republicans want. We're going to do the $1,400 check as promised. Maybe we'll adjust the thresholds, though. And he did kind of reiterate maybe that we would see those thresholds that you could get the check if you're single making $40,000 and it fully cuts off at $50K. Which means for couples, you would get a full cutoff at $100,000. So really nobody making six figures as a family would be getting a stimulus check. Biden then went on to say that we have to do this recovery package so that way it doesn't take us until 2025 to recover to full employment. Instead, maybe we can get to full employment in 2022 or 2023. And he sees fiscal restraint, which is just a fancy way of saying Republicans saying, hey, we don't want to spend as much money. He thinks that fiscal restraint equals more pain for people longer. And he thinks that's wrong. He thinks people shouldn't have to suffer more for longer. He wants to eliminate or limit that suffering as soon as possible. So that's a full summary of what happened with these three different press conferences that took like 90 minutes, and we just did that in 9 minutes. So I think we basically divided by 10 there. I think that's pretty good. Keep in mind that Webull is still offering some free stocks. If you go to metkevin.com/Webull, sign up and deposit some money. Deposit $100 with M1 Finance at metkevin.com/M1. You will get $30. And if you want life insurance without having to talk to anyone at all, make sure you go to the link down below with metkevin.com/life. And you'll be able to sign up in as little as 5 minutes and get yourself life insurance. Thank you so very much for watching. I will be back later with more. All right. Thanks, everyone.